blood-red wine dripping from a slashed bodice, the unmistakable sound of heavy fabric shears snapping shut. Frankie stared at the shredded remains of her mother's vintage silk wedding gown, her heart shattering on the cold marble floor of the bridal suite. Standing over the ruin was her future mother-in-law, a chilling smirk painted on her aristocratic face. "You were never going to marry my son looking like a cheap beggar," she hissed. But Evelyn had no idea who Frankie truly was. Frankie Hayes never intended to fall in love with an heir to a $1 billion shipping empire. She was a senior landscape architect at Peterson and Wright in downtown Boston, a woman who spent her days with dirt under her fingernails, drafting blueprints, and breathing life into barren concrete spaces. Nathaniel Harrington, on the other hand, lived a life completely insulated by generational wealth. He was the golden boy of the Harrington family, groomed from birth to take over the boardroom. Yet, when they collided over a spilled iced coffee in the lobby of a corporate high-rise 3 years ago, the friction sparked a romance that neither could extinguish. Nathaniel was charming, grounded, and blissfully oblivious to the venomous classism that poisoned his family's bloodline. He loved Frankie for her fierce independence, her unpretentious laugh, and the way she saw the world. But his mother, Evelyn Harrington, saw only a threat. Evelyn was a terrifying matriarch. She ruled her sprawling 60-room estate in Newport, Rhode Island, with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. To Evelyn, Frankie was not a woman. She was an infestation. A middle-class interloper with no pedigree, no trust fund, and an embarrassingly modest background. The warfare began the moment Nathaniel proposed. He had bypassed the family's vault of gaudy diamonds and instead proposed with a stunning, understated sapphire ring he had commissioned privately. Evelyn's reaction upon seeing it was a masterclass in passive-aggressive cruelty. Oh, how quaint! Evelyn had purred during their engagement dinner at Le Bernardin, her gaze raking over the ring as if inspecting a counterfeit watch. "It's very suitable for a girl of your station, Frankie. Not too heavy for typing on a keyboard." Frankie had bitten her tongue, a habit she was forced to perfect over the ensuing months. The wedding planning became a daily battlefield. Evelyn demanded a spectacle of wealth, a 500-guest gala at the Breakers Swans in the reflecting pool, and a guest list overflowing with politicians, tech moguls, and European aristocrats. Frankie preferring a quiet botanical garden ceremony, compromised to keep the peace. She surrendered the venue, the catering, and the floral arrangements. But she drew a hard, unwavering line at the dress. Evelyn had arranged a private fitting at a flagship bridal house in New York, demanding Frankie wear a custom $120,000 gown dripping in Swarovski crystals. A Harrington bride does not buy off the rack. Evelyn had dictated sipping champagne while two attendants hovered nervously, but Frankie had a different vision. Before her mother passed away when Frankie was just a teenager, she had left behind a simple, breathtakingly elegant silk slip dress. It was a vintage masterpiece from the late 1980s, entirely hand-stitched, woven from a rare luminous silk that seemed to catch the light from the inside out. Frankie had taken it to a highly respected local artisan, Vivienne Dubois, to have it modernly tailored and overlaid with delicate Chantilly lace. The total cost was modest, but to Frankie it was priceless. It was the only piece of her mother she could carry down the aisle. When Evelyn finally saw the finished gown during a fitting 3 weeks before the wedding, the temperature in the room plummeted. "You intend to wear that?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper, yet it echoed in the small boutique like a gunshot. "It looks like a nightgown, or a tragedy." "It was my mother's, Evelyn," Frankie replied, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. "Vivienne restored it beautifully. This is what I'm wearing." Evelyn's eyes narrowed into dark, calculating slits. She slowly set down her tea saucer. "My friends are flying in from Geneva and London, Frankie. They are accustomed to royalty, to high society. I will not have my son standing at the altar next to a woman who looks like she raided a thrift store. It reflects poorly on the Harrington name." "I am marrying Nathaniel, not the Harrington name," Frankie said firmly, stepping off the pedestal. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. She didn't throw a tantrum. She merely smiled, a thin, bloodless stretching of the lips that didn't reach her eyes. "We shall see," she murmured. Frankie should have recognized the promise in those 3 words. She should have known that a woman like Evelyn Harrington did not lose. The Friday evening before the wedding arrived, bringing with it a thick, suffocating humidity that rolled off the Rhode Island coast. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Ocean House in Watch Hill, an extravagant affair that Evelyn had hijacked and turned into a networking event for her husband's corporate allies. Frankie sat rigidly at the head table, wearing a tasteful emerald green cocktail dress. Beside her, Nathaniel was engaged in a deep, animated conversation with a senator completely blind to the subtle, agonizing torture his mother was inflicting on his bride. Evelyn's psychological warfare was meticulously orchestrated. She had seated Frankie's small family, her maternal Aunt Josephine, and her best friend and maid of honor Harper, at a drafty table adjacent to the kitchen swinging doors. Throughout the night, Evelyn made sure to introduce Frankie to her elite guests with devastating qualifiers. "This is Frankie." Evelyn would trill, resting a heavy manicured hand on Frankie's shoulder. "She's a gardener, essentially. Nathaniel has always had such a soft spot for charity cases." Frankie's face burned, but she maintained a polite smile, digging her fingernails into her palms under the table. Harper, watching from across the room, looked ready to commit a felony on Frankie's behalf. The climax of the evening occurred during the toasts. Evelyn stood up, commanding the room with the clinking of a silver spoon against crystal. "To my wonderful son Nathaniel." Evelyn began, her voice projecting effortlessly. "A man of vision, of legacy. And to Frankie, we admire her ambition. It takes a certain kind of determination to climb so far from where one starts. We can only hope she adapts to the tremendous weight and responsibility of our world." Cheers. It was a masterfully veiled insult. The corporate sharks in the room chuckled knowingly. Frankie felt the blood drain from her face. Nathaniel, ever the optimist, simply squeezed her hand, misinterpreting his mother's words as a quirky compliment. "She's trying, Mads," he whispered. "She's really trying." Unable to breathe under the oppressive weight of the room's judgment, Frankie excused herself and hurried toward the opulent restrooms to collect herself. She leaned against the marble vanity, splashing cold water on her wrists, trying to calm the frantic beating of her heart. Just one more day, she told herself in the mirror. Tomorrow you marry the man you love. Tomorrow the planning is over. The heavy oak door swung open, and the lock clicked shut with a sharp, ominous sound. Evelyn stepped into the restroom. The older woman's facade dropped instantly. Gone was the charming hostess. In her place stood a cold, furious matriarch. Evelyn walked slowly toward the vanity, her eyes locked on Frankie's reflection. "You really think you've won, don't you?" Evelyn said softly, her voice echoing off the tile. "Evelyn, please. Not tonight." Frankie sighed, turning to face her. "Can we just get through this weekend?" "Oh, we will get through this weekend," Evelyn replied, stepping into Frankie's personal space. The scent of her heavy, expensive perfume was cloying. "But let us be perfectly clear. You are a parasite. You have blinded my son with this pathetic homespun charm of yours. But you do not belong here. You will never belong here. Nathaniel chose me." Frankie said, her voice shaking, but her chin raised defensively. "There's nothing you can do about that." Evelyn reached out her perfectly manicured fingers, tracing the collar of Frankie's dress. Frankie flinched, but stood her ground. "I offered you a dignified exit," Evelyn whispered maliciously. "I offered to buy you a gown that would at least allow you to pretend you were worthy of standing in our family's photographs. But you insisted on wearing that tragic yellowing rag from your dead mother. You insulted me, Frankie. In my world, insults have consequences. My dress is beautiful, and it means everything to me." Frankie snapped, finally pushing Evelyn's hand away. "If you can't respect me, you will at least respect the boundaries of my marriage." Evelyn threw her head back and let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Your marriage. How amusing." She turned on her heel, unlocking the restroom door. Before stepping back out into the glittering ballroom, she looked over her shoulder. "Sleep well, Frankie. Tomorrow is going to be an unforgettable day." Frankie was left alone in the cold, echoing bathroom, a profound sense of dread settling into the pit of her stomach like a lead weight. Saturday morning broke with gray overcast skies that threatened rain, though the forecast promised clear weather by the afternoon ceremony. Frankie awoke at 5 a.m., her stomach in tight knots. She slipped out of her hotel room and made her way down the plush carpeted hallways of the luxury estate toward the designated bridal suite. Harper was already texting her promising coffee and bagels. Frankie unlocked the heavy double doors of the suite. The room was dark save for the pale morning light filtering through the sheer curtains. She reached for the light switch, her mind racing with a to-do list. Hair at 7 makeup, at 8 photographer at 10. The chandelier flickered on, flooding the room with brilliant light. Frankie froze. The breath was violently knocked from her lungs. In the center of the room, hanging from a velvet mannequin where she had carefully placed it the night before, was her wedding dress. But it was no longer a dress. It was a massacre. The luminous vintage silk had been violently slashed. Huge, jagged cuts tore through the bodice. The delicate Chantilly lace that Vivienne Dubois had painstakingly applied was shredded, hanging in pathetic frayed ribbons. The skirt had been hacked mercilessly, exposing the tulle underskirts, which were also chopped and mutilated, and smeared across the center of the ruined silk, seeping into the delicate fibers and ruining them forever, were dark, sprawling stains of red wine. No. Frankie whimpered, the sound escaping her throat like a dying animal. She stumbled forward, falling to her knees before the mannequin. Her trembling hands reached out, brushing against the ruined fabric. No, no, no. Mom, no. Tears blurred her vision as a wave of paralyzing devastation washed over her. This wasn't just a dress. It was her history. It was the physical embodiment of her mother's memory, the one tangible piece of maternal love she had left in the world. And it was gone. Butchered. The sound of the door clicking shut made Frankie violently snap her head around. Evelyn Harrington stood inside the suite. In her right hand, she casually held a pair of heavy iron-handled fabric shears, the kind used by professional tailors. She wore a pristine silk dressing gown, looking perfectly rested and terrifyingly calm. "Good morning, Frankie." Evelyn said, her voice light and conversational, as if she were commenting on the weather. She strolled over to a silver tray on a side table, setting the heavy shears down with a loud metallic clack. Frankie couldn't speak. She could only stare, horrified, as Evelyn poured herself a cup of coffee from a silver carafe. What did you do?" Frankie finally choked out, her voice breaking into a sob. Evelyn took a delicate sip of her coffee, her eyes dancing with wicked triumph. "Me, I didn't do anything, my dear. I merely came to check on the bride. It appears someone, perhaps a disgruntled hotel employee, or maybe a stray dog, got in here last night. Such a shame. Security these days is simply deplorable." "You monster!" Frankie screamed, surging to her feet. "You destroyed it! You destroyed my mother's dress!" Evelyn's smile vanished, replaced by a gaze as hard and cold as diamonds. She stepped closer to Frankie, lowering her voice to a lethal whisper. "I told you you would not wear that rag down the aisle. I warned you, Frankie. Now you have a choice." Evelyn gestured to a garment bag hanging in the corner of the room, a bag that hadn't been there the night before. "Inside that bag is an Oscar de la Renta gown in your size. It is exquisite. It is worthy of my son. You will put it on, you will fix your face, and you will walk down that aisle looking exactly how I tell you to look. Or you can walk out the front door of this hotel in your sweatpants and cancel the whole thing." "Nathaniel will never forgive you for this." Frankie sobbed, clutching a shredded piece of lace to her chest. Nathaniel will never know," Evelyn retorted smoothly. "If you breathe a word of this to my son, I will ruin you. I will have my lawyers tie up your father's meager retirement fund in litigation until he dies penniless. I will have you blacklisted from every architectural firm on the East Coast. You will put on the dress I bought, and you will smile, and you will be exactly the silent, obedient little ornament I require." The door burst open. Harper rushed in, holding 2 trays of coffee. The moment she saw the shredded dress and Frankie sobbing on the floor, the trays slipped from her hands, crashing to the carpet in a spray of brown liquid. Oh my God! Harper gasped, rushing to Frankie's side, wrapping her arms around her friend. She glared up at Evelyn, pure hatred radiating from her eyes. You psycho bitch! I'm calling the police! Call them, Evelyn challenged, unbothered. There are no cameras in this hallway. It is my word against yours. And who do you think the local police chief answers to in this town? I pay his salary. Evelyn checked her diamond-encrusted Rolex. You have exactly 3 hours before the photographer arrives. I suggest you get to work. With a final victorious smirk, Evelyn swept out of the room, leaving Frankie broken on the floor. Frankie felt like she was suffocating. She fumbled for her phone, dialing Nathaniel's number with shaking fingers. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. Evelyn had likely confiscated his phone, citing groom's morning relaxation rules. Frankie was completely trapped. Her mother's legacy was destroyed, her spirit was crushed, and the man she loved was locked away in a bubble of ignorance. I can't do this. Harper. Frankie wept, burying her face in her hands. She won. I can't put on her dress. I won't do it. Harper, tears streaming down her own face, held Frankie tightly. We'll figure something out, Maddie. We'll find a tailor. We'll tape it together. But they both looked at the ruined silk. There was no fixing it. It was completely unsalvageable. The clock ticked mercilessly toward the ceremony time. Frankie was moments away from giving up, entirely ready to pack her bags and run. But Frankie Hayes had forgotten one crucial detail about her family history. She had always kept her late mother's past a secret, mostly because it sounded like a fairy tale she scarcely believed herself. Her mother hadn't just been a normal woman who left a beautiful dress. She had been born Princess Amelia of the Sovereign House of Valerius, a tiny, outrageously wealthy European principality. Amelia had abdicated her title for love, moving to America to marry Frankie's father. Frankie had never met her royal relatives, assuming they had disowned her mother permanently. She didn't know that her Aunt Duchess Catherine had been keeping a very close, very protective eye on her niece from across the ocean. As Frankie wept on the floor, the sound of heavy tires crunching on the gravel driveway drifted through the open balcony window. Down below, a fleet of 10 jet-black SUVs with diplomatic license plates was pulling up to the front entrance of the estate. The real royalty had arrived. Harper was the first to hear the commotion. Still kneeling on the floor beside a sobbing Frankie, she turned her head toward the French doors leading to the balcony. The unmistakable rhythmic crunch of heavy tires rolling over the estate's imported gravel cut through the damp morning air. "Maddie, look," Harper whispered, wiping her own tear-stained cheeks. She stood up and walked to the balcony, her eyes widening in absolute disbelief. Below them, a fleet of 10 identical jet-black Range Rovers with heavily tinted windows and diplomatic license plates had forcefully occupied the sweeping circular driveway of the Harrington estate. The valets and hotel staff were scrambling, trying to intercept the vehicles, but they were immediately waved off by imposing men in tailored Navy suits who stepped out of the SUVs. These men moved with a terrifying synchronized efficiency. They weren't mere bodyguards. They were a highly trained security detail. Who is that? Frankie choked out her voice raw, pulling herself up from the floor. She stared blankly at the ruined ribbons of her mother's dress. Did Evelyn hire more security to throw me out? I don't think Evelyn has this kind of pull, Harper murmured, stepping back as heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed in the corridor outside their suite. The heavy mahogany doors to the bridal suite did not just open. They were swiftly and decisively pushed apart by 2 of the suited men who immediately stepped aside and stood at attention. Into the room strode 10 women. They did not look like hotel staff. They were dressed in immaculate, identical charcoal gray suits with high collars, their hair pinned into severe, flawless chignons. They moved with a silent military precision, carrying large locked steamer trunks clad in rich navy leather, embossed with a silver crest that Frankie did not immediately recognize. The 10 women filed into the room, lining up perfectly against the far wall, their faces utterly impassive. Then the final figure entered the suite. She was a woman in her late 60s, but she possessed a posture so rigidly perfect, she seemed to tower over everyone in the room. She wore a bespoke ivory Chanel skirt suit, a double string of flawless South Sea pearls, and carried an ebony walking cane topped with a silver griffin. Her silver hair was styled impeccably, but it was her eyes that commanded the room-piercing, icy blue eyes that immediately locked onto Frankie. Frankie froze. There was something undeniably hauntingly familiar about the woman's facial structure. It was the same elegant jawline, the same slope of the nose that Frankie saw every time she looked in the mirror. It was the face of her mother, aged and refined by decades of unimaginable wealth and authority. "You have her eyes," the woman said. Her voice was a rich transatlantic purr that resonated with absolute authority. Amelia's eyes. Frankie swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Who are you?" The woman stepped forward, her cane tapping softly against the hardwood floor. "I am Catherine, Duchess of Valerius. I am your mother's elder sister, Frankie, and I have crossed the Atlantic to ensure my niece is not thrown to the wolves on her wedding day." Harper let out a breathless gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. Frankie felt the room spin. Her mother had mentioned a sister once in passing, but always with a wistful sadness, claiming that world was forever closed to them. Catherine's icy gaze drifted from Frankie's pale face to the center of the room. She saw the velvet mannequin. She saw the slashed silk, the shredded chantilly lace, the grotesque sprawling stains of red wine that ruined the delicate fabric. The silence in the room became violently heavy. The temperature seemed to plummet 10 degrees. The 10 maids standing against the wall stiffened their eyes, widening imperceptibly at the sight of the butchered gown. Catherine walked slowly toward the mannequin. She reached out a gloved hand and touched a frayed ribbon of silk. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it vibrated with a lethal, terrifying fury. "Who did this?" Catherine asked. Frankie felt a fresh wave of tears prick her eyes. "Evelyn, Nathaniel's mother. She wanted me to wear an Oscar de la Renta gown she bought. She told me if I didn't comply, she would ruin my father and destroy my career. She said my mother's dress was a beggar's rag." Catherine closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them, the storm brewing within them was apocalyptic. "A beggar's rag," Catherine repeated softly, tasting the insult. "Evelyn Harrington, a woman whose family acquired their wealth hauling cargo in rusty boats, daring to lay hands on the sacred property of the House of Valerius, daring to terrorize the daughter of Princess Amelia." Catherine turned sharply, tapping her cane twice on the floor. Instantly, the 10 royal maids sprang into action. They stepped forward seamlessly, forming a protective circle around Frankie. The lead maid, a tall woman with sharp cheekbones named Brigitte, unlocked the largest Navy steamer trunk. "Your mother abdicated her title for love." "Frankie," Catherine said, stepping closer and gently taking Frankie's trembling hands in her own. "But she was never stripped of her bloodline, and neither are you. For 3 years I have watched you from afar. I watched you fall in love with this Harrington boy. I knew his mother was a venomous nouveau riche social climber. I anticipated she would try to break you, so I took precautions." Brigitte pushed open the heavy lid of the trunk. Inside, resting on layers of archival tissue paper, was a glow that seemed to illuminate the dim suite. The 10 maids carefully lifted the garment from the trunk. Frankie stopped breathing. It was a custom wedding gown handcrafted by the Royal Ateliers of Valerius over the course of 8 meticulous months. It was constructed from liquid silver silk, zibeline, a fabric so rare and dense it moved like water. The bodice was structured with flawless, regal precision, overlaid with centuries-old Alençon lace that had been pulled from the royal vaults. Intricate, glittering beadwork crawled across the neckline. Not cheap crystals, but hundreds of microscopic, brilliant cut diamonds and pearls. The train was a magnificent cathedral-length sweep of silk that seemed to go on forever. "Evelyn Harrington wishes to play a game of wealth." Catherine stated, her voice hardening into steel. "She wishes to parade you as her defeated, subservient little project. She thinks her credit limit makes her a queen." Catherine smiled a terrifying, predatory expression. Today we remind her what a true queen looks like. I, I can't, Frankie stammered, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the gown and the sudden overwhelming presence of her aunt. Nathaniel doesn't know. Nobody knows. Nathaniel will learn, Catherine said firmly. If he is worthy of you, he will drop to his knees. If he is his mother's son, you will walk away, and the Harrington Empire will face the wrath of a sovereign nation. Brigitte. Yes, Your Grace. The lead maid responded instantly. You have exactly 2 hours. Catherine commanded, checking a platinum pocket watch. I want her hair restyled. I want the makeup flawless. I want her dripping in the Valerius Sapphire suite. She is not Frankie the landscape architect today. Today she is Her Serene Highness, Frankie of Valerius. Do not fail me. We will not, Your Grace, Brigitte replied. Harper, recovering from her shock, marched up to Brigitte. Tell me what to do. I'm the maid of honor. Brigitte offered Harper a rare, respectful nod. Grab the jewelry case, Miss Harper. We have work to do. As the maid swarmed Frankie, gently peeling her out of her casual clothes and beginning the painstaking process of transforming her, Catherine walked over to the ruined remains of Amelia's dress. She carefully unhooked the hanger from the mannequin and handed it to one of her security guards. Box this up, Catherine ordered coldly. We will be presenting it to Mrs. Harrington shortly. Downstairs, the atmosphere in the grand ballroom of the estate was electric with wealthy arrogance. The florist had draped thousands of imported white orchids from the crystal chandeliers, and the string quartet was tuning their instruments in the corner. Guests dripping in Cartier and Harry Winston were sipping vintage champagne, loudly discussing stock portfolios and summer homes in the Hamptons. Holding court near the grand staircase was Evelyn Harrington. She wore an ostentatious, plunging ruby-red gown that practically screamed for attention. She clutched a flute of champagne, laughing heartily at a joke made by Senator Holloway. Oh, the wedding will be simply perfect. Evelyn boasted, her voice carrying over the music. Frankie is such a sweet, pliable girl. She was a bit confused about her wardrobe, of course. Tried to bring in some dreadful moth-eaten thing she found in a basement. But I graciously intervened. I bought her an Oscar de la Renta this morning. It takes a village to polish a stone, wouldn't you agree, Senator Teeny? Senator Holloway chuckled, sipping his scotch. Generous to a fault, Evelyn. Nathaniel is lucky to have your guidance. Evelyn smiled, a smug, venomous curve of her lips. She checked her watch. It was almost time for the ceremony to begin. She imagined Frankie upstairs crying silently into the mirror as she zipped herself into the gown Evelyn had chosen, thoroughly broken and tamed. The thought filled Evelyn with a dark, intoxicating thrill. Suddenly, a disturbance rippled through the front lobby. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom were pushed open not by the event coordinators, but by 3 imposing men in navy suits. They stepped into the room and immediately took up positions by the exits, their hands resting casually but deliberately near their lapels. The string quartet faltered and stopped playing. The low hum of aristocratic chatter died out, replaced by confused murmurs. What on earth is going on? Evelyn hissed, her smile vanishing. She marched toward the entrance, her ruby dress swishing angrily. Excuse me, who let you in here? This is a private event. Where is the head of security? Donovan. The local security chief, a burly man named Donovan, jogged into the room looking pale and sweating profusely. Mrs. Harrington, I tried to stop them, but they have diplomatic immunity. The local police chief won't touch them. Diplomatic immunity. Evelyn scoffed loudly. What kind of ridiculous stunt is this? It is not a stunt, Mrs. Harrington. A commanding voice rang out from the archway. The crowd parted instantly as Duchess Catherine stepped into the ballroom. The sheer magnitude of her presence sucked the oxygen from the room. She moved with the slow, predatory grace of a lioness, her silver-topped cane clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. Behind her walked 2 guards, one of them carrying a large, flat, transparent archival box. Evelyn stared at the older woman, momentarily thrown completely off balance. She prided herself on knowing everyone who mattered in high society, but this woman was entirely foreign to her. Yet the way Catherine carried herself made Evelyn's own aggressive posturing feel incredibly cheap. "And who exactly are you?" Evelyn demanded, trying to regain her footing. "Are you from the catering company?" A few guests gasped at the sheer audacity of the insult, sensing immediately that Catherine was not a woman to be trifled with. Catherine stopped 3 feet away from Evelyn. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I am Catherine, Duchess of Valerius, and you, Evelyn, are a petty, malicious woman who made the fatal mistake of mistaking kindness for weakness." Evelyn's face drained of color. The name Valerius hung in the air. The House of Valerius was legendary, one of the oldest, wealthiest, and most fiercely private sovereign families in Europe. They owned half the real estate in Monaco and held stakes in global banking that dwarfed the Harrington shipping empire 10 times over. I don't understand," Evelyn stammered, taking a step back. "Why are you here?" Catherine signaled her guard. The man stepped forward and held up the transparent archival box. Inside lay the shredded, wine-stained remains of Amelia's vintage silk dress. Nathaniel, who had just entered the ballroom from the groom's holding area, froze in his tracks. He stared at the ruined fabric, his face crumpling in confusion. "Mom, what is that? Is that Frankie's mother's dress?" Evelyn's hands began to shake, causing her champagne to spill over the rim of her flute. It was an accident. The hotel staff— "Do not insult my intelligence with your pathetic lies." Catherine cut her off, her voice cracking like a whip. "You took tailoring shears to my sister's gown. You thought you could terrorize a defenseless orphan. You thought Frankie had no one to protect her." Nathaniel pushed his way through the crowd, his eyes darting between Catherine and his mother. "Wait, your sister Frankie's mother was your sister—" Catherine turned her icy gaze to Nathaniel. "Yes, Mr. Harrington. Your bride's mother was Princess Amelia of Valerius. Frankie is not a charity case. She is a princess of sovereign blood. And you—" Catherine turned back to Evelyn, her eyes narrowing with absolute contempt. "Are a bully hiding behind a checkbook. Your actions this morning were not just a personal attack. They were a desecration of royal property." The entire ballroom erupted into shocked whispers. The billionaire executives and socialites who had laughed at Evelyn's cruel jokes moments ago were suddenly stepping away from her, realizing they were standing next to a social pariah. Evelyn opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She was drowning in her own humiliation. "Where is she?" Nathaniel demanded, his voice breaking, turning away from his mother in absolute disgust. "Where is Frankie?" Right on cue, the heavy double doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. The murmuring in the ballroom ceased instantly. A profound, reverent silence fell over the 500 guests. There stood Frankie. She was a vision that defied comprehension. The liquid silver zibeline gown clung perfectly to her silhouette, the Alençon lace glowing under the chandeliers. But it was the jewelry that truly stopped hearts. Resting against her collarbone was the legendary Valerius sapphire collar, a heavy platinum piece dripping with unheated deep blue sapphires, the size of robin's eggs, matched perfectly by a dazzling tiara woven into her swept-up hair. She looked ethereal, powerful, and utterly untouchable. Flanked by the 10 royal maids in their immaculate gray suits, Frankie began her descent down the staircase. She did not look at the guests. She did not look at Evelyn, who was now trembling violently, realizing she had just declared war on a family that could erase the Harrington name from the global market with a single phone call. Frankie looked only at Nathaniel. Nathaniel stood at the bottom of the stairs, tears streaming down his face. He didn't care about the crown. He didn't care about the title. He only saw the woman he loved, who had endured his mother's monstrous cruelty in silence, emerging from the ashes with breathtaking dignity. As Frankie reached the final step, Nathaniel fell to his knees right there in front of the entire assembly. He took her hands, burying his face against the cool, diamond-encrusted fabric of her sleeve. "I am so sorry," Nathaniel wept, his voice carrying through the silent room. "I am so sorry I didn't protect you." Frankie smiled softly, a genuine, loving smile. She reached down and gently pulled him back to his feet. "You're protecting me now," she whispered. Catherine stepped forward, her cane tapping the marble. She looked at Evelyn, who was desperately trying to shrink into the shadows of the floral arrangements. "The wedding will proceed," Catherine announced to the room, her voice leaving no room for argument. "But the seating arrangements have changed. Mrs. Harrington, you will find your new seat in the absolute back row behind the kitchen doors. If you make a single sound during the ceremony, my security will physically remove you from the premises." Evelyn, the terrifying matriarch of Newport, simply nodded, broken and humiliated, and scurried away. Frankie linked her arm through Nathaniel's, the weight of the royal tiara resting perfectly on her head, as the string quartet quickly transitioned into a soaring, triumphant royal anthem. The golden cage had been shattered, and a queen was ready to walk down the aisle. The grand ballroom of the oceanfront estate had been meticulously transformed into a breathtaking cathedral of white blooms and glowing candlelight. But the atmosphere had shifted from a parade of arrogant wealth to a stunned, reverent hush. The string quartet, previously playing standard classical background noise, now swelled into a magnificent soaring processional that echoed with royal authority. Frankie walked down the aisle, her arm looped securely through Nathaniel's, the heavy liquid silver silk of her custom Zibelline gown whispering powerfully against the imported marble floor. The Valerius sapphire collar resting against her collarbone caught the light of the crystal chandeliers, throwing fractured prisms of deep oceanic blue across the faces of the silent, staring guests. These were the same 500 elite guests who only an hour prior had snickered behind their champagne flutes at Evelyn Harrington's cruel jokes about Frankie's modest background. Now they were entirely captivated, their expressions a mixture of absolute awe and sheer panic. They realized with horrifying clarity that they had spent the entire weekend openly mocking a woman who possessed a bloodline and a backing of wealth that could financially obliterate every single person in the room. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rustle of silk and the soft, rhythmic clicking of Duchess Catherine's silver-topped cane as she walked proudly to the front row, taking the seat of honor that had originally been designated for Evelyn. Evelyn Harrington. The terrifying matriarch of Newport was nowhere near the front. True to Catherine's ruthless command, Evelyn had been banished to the absolute back of the enormous room. She was seated on a flimsy wooden chair, usually reserved for coats, shoved directly next to the swinging metal doors of the catering kitchen. Two of the imposing Valerius security guards stood casually but firmly on either side of her, their eyes fixed straight ahead, their sheer physical presence effectively pinning her in place. Evelyn sat rigidly in her ostentatious ruby-red gown, her face a pale, blotchy mask of suppressed rage and profound humiliation. Every time the kitchen doors swung open, a rush of hot, garlic-scented air and the clatter of dishware washed over her, serving as a bitter reminder of her sudden plunge from the top of the social hierarchy. At the altar beneath an archway of thousands of imported white orchids, Nathaniel turned to fully face his bride. His eyes were red-rimmed, still recovering from the overwhelming shock of his mother's betrayal and the astonishing revelation of Frankie's true heritage. He reached out, taking both of Frankie's hands in his thumbs gently brushing over her knuckles. "I cannot believe you endured that monster in silence," Nathaniel whispered, his voice thick with emotion, ignoring the officiant who was patiently waiting to begin. "I'm so incredibly sorry, Frankie. I was blind. I let her hurt you because I thought she was just being difficult. I never knew she was capable of something so utterly vile." Frankie looked up into his eyes, her expression soft but resolute. The heavy diamond-encrusted tiara in her hair felt strangely natural, a physical manifestation of the strength she had always carried inside her. "You didn't know Nathaniel. She isolated me and threatened my father. But that doesn't matter anymore. We are here now, and she has absolutely no power over us ever again." Nathaniel nodded, a sudden fierce determination hardening his jawline. He turned to the officiant. "Let's begin. But we are skipping the traditional Harrington vows." The officiant blinked, clearly flustered. "Sir, but your mother specifically requested." My mother is no longer involved in this wedding, Nathaniel stated loudly, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent ballroom, ensuring that every guest and Evelyn in the back heard him clearly. We will speak from the heart. The ceremony proceeded with a profound emotional weight that brought tears to the eyes of Frankie's small family. Harper, standing at Frankie's side as maid of honor, was beaming with uncontainable pride, occasionally shooting triumphant, glaring looks toward the back of the room where Evelyn suffered in silence. When it came time for the rings, Nathaniel pulled the understated private commission sapphire ring from his pocket, the exact ring Evelyn had mocked so viciously months ago. As he slipped it onto Frankie's finger, it perfectly complemented the royal sapphires resting on her chest. Frankie. Nathaniel said, his voice ringing with absolute clarity. I promise to love you, to honor you, and to fiercely protect you. I am stepping away from the shadows of my family's expectations, and I am stepping into a future that belongs entirely to us. I renounce any legacy that demands cruelty. You are my only priority today and forever. It was a public, undeniable severance. Nathaniel was not just marrying Frankie, he was formally abdicating his position as the obedient golden boy of the Harrington Empire. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. In the back row, Evelyn let out a strangled, furious noise, half standing from her wooden chair. Instantly, the Valerius guard to her left placed a heavy, unyielding hand firmly on her shoulder, forcing her back down into the seat. Do not make a scene. Mrs. Harrington, the guard murmured coldly, his voice devoid of any sympathy. The Duchess will not hesitate to have you escorted to the parking lot. Frankie smiled, a brilliant, radiant expression that illuminated the room. She spoke her vows softly but confidently, promising a lifetime of partnership, respect, and unwavering love. When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, Nathaniel pulled her into a deep, passionate kiss. The ballroom erupted into deafening applause. The corporate sharks and socialites clapped enthusiastically, desperately trying to visually align themselves with the new power dynamic. The golden cage had been shattered completely. The transition from the ceremony to the grand reception was swift, but the power structure of the room had permanently, irrevocably changed. The head table, originally designed to showcase Evelyn and her elite circle of political allies, had been completely commandeered by Duchess Catherine. She sat in the center like a reigning monarch, with Frankie and Nathaniel on her right and Frankie's fiercely loyal maid of honor Harper on her left. The 10 royal maids, led by the stoic Brigitte, stood at strategic points around the perimeter of the dining area, ensuring absolute peace. Evelyn was nowhere to be seen. Following the ceremony, she had practically sprinted to the private holding rooms, desperate to escape the judging eyes of her peers and formulate a plan to salvage her ruined reputation. It was halfway through the caviar service when Gregory Harrington finally arrived. Nathaniel's father was a massive, imposing man who practically breathed corporate strategy. He had been delayed by a critical maritime shipping crisis in Shanghai and had entirely missed the morning's drama, the ruined dress, and the ceremony itself. He strode into the ballroom, smoothing his expensive tuxedo, expecting to see his wife holding court and his son perfectly compliant. Instead, he noticed the strange, terrified energy of his guests. He saw the intimidating men in navy suits guarding the exits, and then he saw the head table. Gregory froze, his sharp eyes locking onto Duchess Catherine. He was a billionaire with global ties. He knew exactly who the House of Valerius was. The Harrington shipping empire relied heavily on the sovereign ports and aristocratic banking institutions that Catherine's family controlled. Without their favor, the Harrington fleet would be crippled in European waters. Sweating slightly, Gregory bypassed the frantic event coordinators and marched directly up to the head table. He offered a deep, incredibly respectful bow. Your Grace, I am utterly astounded. I had no idea the House of Valerius would be honoring my son's wedding. We are deeply humbled by your presence. Catherine did not smile. She slowly set down her crystal wine glass, her piercing blue eyes locking onto Gregory with the intensity of a predator studying its prey. Mr. Harrington, do sit down. We have a great deal of business to discuss regarding the conduct of your wife. Gregory's brow furrowed in confusion. My wife, Evelyn, I apologize. Your Grace, I literally just arrived from the airfield. Has Evelyn offended you? Offended is a remarkably inadequate word, Catherine replied smoothly, leaning back in her chair. Your wife took a pair of tailoring shears and violently destroyed a priceless vintage silk gown that belonged to my late sister, Princess Amelia. She did this to terrorize my niece Frankie, forcing her into subservience on her wedding day. Evelyn threatened to ruin Frankie's innocent father and permanently destroy her architectural career if she dared to complain. She acted like a petty, malicious street thug. Gregory felt the blood rapidly drain from his face. He looked at Frankie, seeing the magnificent royal sapphires and the stunning custom gown, suddenly realizing the catastrophic magnitude of what his wife had done. He then looked at his son, whose face was a mask of cold, unforgiving anger. Nathaniel, is this true? Gregory rasped, his voice trembling slightly. Every single word of it, Dad, Nathaniel said firmly. Mom cornered her in the bridal suite. She shredded the dress Frankie's mother left her poured red wine all over it and tried to force her to wear something she bought just to prove she owned us. If the Duchess hadn't arrived to intervene, Frankie would have been utterly devastated. Gregory swayed on his feet, the severe implications crashing down upon him like a tidal wave. He knew Evelyn was a snob, but this was a profound, irredeemable level of insanity. Mr. Harrington. Catherine continued, her voice slicing through the air like a finely sharpened blade. The House of Valerius holds significant leverage in the Mediterranean shipping corridors. We also hold considerable influence over the maritime insurance boards in London. I do not do business with families who lack honor, and I certainly do not allow my royal bloodline to be treated like garbage by the newly wealthy. Your Grace, please. Gregory practically begged, the facade of the powerful billionaire completely crumbling. Evelyn's actions are her own. They do not reflect the company. They do not reflect me. Then you will prove it, Catherine demanded softly. Effective immediately, Evelyn Harrington will hold no seats on your corporate board. She will have no access to your philanthropic trusts, and she will be permanently barred from engaging in any business that intersects with our interests. Furthermore, I expect a public legally binding apology to Frankie and full restitution for the emotional terrorism she inflicted. If these conditions are not met by Monday morning, I will personally see to it that your shipping empire is entirely frozen out of European ports. You will be bankrupt by Christmas. Do we have an understanding? Not. Gregory swallowed hard, his throat dry. He looked at his son's new bride, realizing she was no longer the quiet landscape architect they had dismissed, but a formidable force of nature backed by unimaginable power. We have an absolute understanding, Your Grace. I will handle Evelyn immediately. Gregory turned on his heel, his face purple with a mixture of profound embarrassment and boiling rage, and stormed out of the ballroom to find his wife. The rest of the evening was a magnificent, joyous celebration of liberation. Frankie danced with her aunt the Duchess, showing a surprisingly warm maternal side beneath her terrifyingly strict exterior. Harper managed to flirt successfully with one of the dashing Valerius security guards, and Nathaniel held his new wife close, whispering promises of a future completely free from his family's toxic manipulation. Hours later, as the reception finally began to wind down, Frankie and Nathaniel prepared to leave for their honeymoon. They changed into elegant, comfortable travel clothes, the heavy royal tiara carefully packed back into its secure custom velvet vault by the ever-efficient Brigitte. As they walked out to the waiting limousine, a sleek black car provided by the royal detail, Frankie paused. Standing near the edge of the sprawling driveway, shivering in the cool night air, with a hastily packed overnight bag, was Evelyn. Gregory had evidently wasted no time in executing the Duchess's orders. Evelyn had been stripped of her credit cards, her dignity, and her power publicly thrown out of her own meticulously planned society event. Evelyn looked up, her eyes meeting Frankie's. The older woman's face was utterly defeated, the arrogant sneer completely erased, replaced only by a pathetic, desperate realization that she had orchestrated her own absolute destruction. Frankie did not gloat. She did not yell. She simply looked at the woman who had tried to break her spirit, offered a calm, perfectly serene smile, and gracefully slid into the back of the limousine. The heavy doors clicked shut, sealing them in a quiet, safe embrace. As the car pulled away, leaving the sprawling, toxic estate far behind in the rearview mirror, Nathaniel pulled Frankie into his arms. They were finally free, ready to build their own empire, armed not with malice and control, but with love, truth, and the quiet, unstoppable strength of a queen who had finally found her crown. The honeymoon was a masterclass in absolute, unadulterated luxury, far removed from the toxic, suffocating expectations of the Harrington family estate. Frankie and Nathaniel did not go to the predictable paparazzi-infested beaches of St. Bart's or the crowded resorts of the Maldives. Instead, under the fierce and meticulous direction of Duchess Catherine, they were quietly whisked away to a private, heavily guarded villa on the edge of Lake Como, Italy. The property Villa del Balbianello was a historic masterpiece of Renaissance architecture, boasting terraced gardens that cascaded flawlessly into the shimmering sapphire waters of the lake. For Frankie, a landscape architect who had spent her entire life studying the world's most magnificent gardens from the cramped confines of a cubicle, the estate was a paradise. They spent their mornings wrapped in thick cashmere Loro Piana blankets on the stone terrace, sipping rich Italian espresso while the crisp morning mist rolled off the water. For the first time in 3 years, Nathaniel looked completely weightless. The chronic underlying tension that had always tightened his jaw, a byproduct of constantly managing his mother's impossible expectations, had completely evaporated. He was no longer the designated heir to a cutthroat shipping monopoly. He was simply a man fiercely in love with his wife, liberated by the absolute severing of his family's gilded chains. However, while Frankie and Nathaniel found absolute peace in Europe, a violent, catastrophic storm was tearing through the upper echelons of New England high society. Gregory Harrington had not taken Duchess Catherine's terrifying ultimatum lightly. He understood the lethal reality of international corporate warfare, and he knew that the House of Valerius could systematically dismantle his global supply chains with a single encrypted phone call to their banking allies in Geneva. On the Tuesday following the wedding, the fallout went completely nuclear. The Wall Street Journal published a front-page expose that sent shockwaves through the financial sector. The headline was "Merciless: Harrington Shipping Empire Restructures Amidst Internal Chaos. Matriarch Evelyn Harrington ousted from all board seats." The article meticulously detailed how Gregory had legally severed his wife from every single corporate entity philanthropic trust, an offshore holding company attached to the Harrington name. Evelyn was entirely stripped of her financial autonomy. Her Black American Express Centurion card was deactivated. Her signature was wiped from the accounts at J.P. Morgan Chase. She was in the eyes of the corporate world entirely neutralized. Evelyn, entirely blinded by her own narcissism, attempted a desperate, malicious counterattack. From a modest rented condominium in Tribeca, the only property Gregory had allowed her to occupy, she contacted an editor at Page 6, a man she had frequently bribed with exclusive gala invitations. Evelyn fabricated a wildly scandalous story, claiming that Frankie was a fraudulent gold digger who had hired actors to stage a fake royal intervention to steal the Harrington fortune. It was a fatal miscalculation. Evelyn fundamentally underestimated the terrifying, omnipotent reach of the Valerius intelligence network. Before the tabloid editor could even draft the headline, his publisher received a personal visit from 3 senior attorneys representing the sovereign state of Valerius. They delivered a cease and desist order that was so aggressively comprehensive it threatened to bankrupt the entire publication through international defamation lawsuits if Evelyn's name was ever printed in connection to Frankie again. The editor immediately blocked Evelyn's phone number. The door to the press was permanently slammed shut, bolted, and sealed. Desperate, isolated, and rapidly running out of liquid cash, Evelyn attempted to access a private secondary account she had kept hidden at Credit Suisse in Zurich. She marched into the sleek, glass-walled Manhattan branch, demanding a massive wire transfer to fund a team of aggressive divorce lawyers. The branch manager, a stoic Swiss banker, tapped a few keys on his keyboard and looked up with a blank, unwavering expression. "I apologize, Mrs. Harrington," the manager stated coldly. "This account has been permanently frozen under the direct directive of the International Compliance Board, pending an investigation into unsanctioned offshore maneuvers. We cannot authorize the release of any funds." Evelyn's aristocratic mask shattered completely. She screamed, throwing her heavy Prada handbag across the pristine marble floor, demanding to speak to the regional director, threatening to have the entire staff fired. But her threats were empty, hollow echoes. The security guards, unbothered by her tantrums, simply escorted her out onto the bustling, unforgiving pavement of Wall Street. As she stood on the curb surrounded by busy pedestrians who did not care about her ruined legacy, Evelyn Harrington finally realized the horrifying truth. She was completely, utterly alone, entirely erased from the empire she had ruthlessly guarded. Meanwhile, back in the tranquil beauty of Lake Como, Nathaniel read the digital briefing of his mother's financial ruin on his tablet. He sat in a velvet armchair staring at the screen for a long, silent moment. Frankie walked up behind him gently, wrapping her arms around his shoulders, resting her chin on the top of his head. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice filled with genuine concern. Nathaniel reached up, holding her hand tightly. "I am. It's strange feeling pity for the person who tried to destroy you. But she chose this. She built a cage of cruelty, and now she has to live in it. I'm just glad we are entirely free of it." 6 months later, the bitter chill of winter had melted into a vibrant, blooming New York City spring. Frankie and Nathaniel had permanently relocated to a stunning, light-filled penthouse overlooking Central Park, completely funded by the overwhelming success of Nathaniel's new venture. Leaving the toxic shipping monopoly behind, he had launched an independent clean energy logistics firm. Backed by quiet strategic investments from the Valerius Sovereign Wealth Fund, the company had exploded into a multi-million-dollar triumph within months. Frankie, refusing to become a passive socialite, had elevated her passion. She opened her own boutique landscape architecture firm, Valerius Design, specializing in sustainable historic garden restorations for elite properties across the East Coast. She was thriving, balancing her royal heritage with her grounded dirt under the fingernails work ethic. The ultimate test of their new reality arrived with the invitation to the annual Spring Botanical Gala held at the iconic Pierre Hotel. It was the most exclusive, heavily guarded high society event of the season, a glittering playground for billionaires, politicians, and global royalty. This year, Frankie was not just an attendee. She was the guest of honor celebrated for her firm's philanthropic work, restoring community green spaces in underfunded Brooklyn neighborhoods. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a spectacular sea of emerald silk and diamonds. Frankie stood near the center of the room, radiating quiet, undeniable power. She wore a bespoke emerald green gown designed by Vivienne Dubois, the same talented artisan who had restored her mother's dress, and around her neck rested a delicate, breathtaking diamond choker, a gift from Duchess Catherine. Nathaniel stood proudly at her side, looking devastatingly handsome in a classic black tuxedo, completely comfortable in his new role. The evening was proceeding flawlessly until a sudden jarring commotion erupted near the golden revolving doors of the hotel lobby. Evelyn Harrington, wearing a heavily discounted, out-of-season designer gown, was forcefully trying to push her way past the imposing security desk. She clutched a forged VIP pass, her hair slightly unkempt, her eyes wild with a desperate, manic need to reclaim her lost social standing. She had spent the last 6 months sliding into absolute obscurity, living in isolation, entirely ignored by the women she once considered her loyal subjects. She thought if she could just get into the room, if she could just be photographed next to a senator or a CEO, she could claw her way back from the abyss. "Unhand me, you absolute brute!" Evelyn shrieked, slapping at the security guard who was firmly holding her elbow. "I am Evelyn Harrington. My family built this city's shipping infrastructure. I belong in that ballroom." The noise bled into the grand hall, causing the string quartet to falter. The crowd parted, their wealthy murmurs turning into sharp, collective gasps of secondhand embarrassment. Frankie turned toward the entrance. She saw Evelyn struggling, looking utterly pathetic, a ghost of the terrifying matriarch she had once been. Nathaniel stiffened, a flash of anger crossing his face, but Frankie gently placed a reassuring hand on his chest. She did not need protection. She was the absolute authority in the room. Walking with slow, deliberate grace, Frankie approached the lobby boundary. The sea of billionaires and socialites immediately stepped back, offering her a wide, respectful berth. Duchess Catherine, who had flown in from Monaco specifically for the gala, stepped out from the VIP lounge, her silver-topped cane clicking sharply against the polished marble floor, flanking Frankie like a royal general. Evelyn froze when she saw them. The desperate fight drained out of her, replaced by a cold, paralyzing terror. "Mrs. Harrington." Frankie said, her voice perfectly level, carrying an icy, aristocratic calm that echoed through the silent lobby. "This is a private, philanthropic event dedicated to cultivating growth and beauty. It is no place for toxic weeds. You are trespassing." Evelyn's jaw trembled. "Frankie, please," she rasped, her voice cracking, completely devoid of her former arrogance. "I have nothing. Gregory took everything. My friends won't return my calls. Please just let me sit at a back table. Just let me be seen." It was a profound, shocking reversal. The woman who had banished Frankie's family to the kitchen doors at the rehearsal dinner, the woman who had slashed a priceless vintage gown just to prove a point, was now publicly begging for a scrap of relevance. Duchess Catherine stepped forward, her blue eyes colder than liquid nitrogen. "You were given a choice 6 months ago, Evelyn. You chose malice. The universe merely provided the receipt for your actions. Security removed this woman from the premises immediately and permanently blacklist her from all properties managed by our corporate partners. 2 massive NYPD officers hired for the event's exterior security stepped in, taking Evelyn by both arms. She did not fight them. She simply hung her head, weeping silently, as she was humiliatingly escorted out of the glittering lobby and pushed out into the cold, unforgiving rain of the New York streets. The heavy golden doors spun shut, sealing the toxic past outside forever. Frankie turned back to face the stunned, silent crowd. She offered a warm, brilliant smile, entirely unbothered by the disruption. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced smoothly, "please let us return to the music and the champagne. We have a wonderful future to celebrate." The crowd immediately erupted into enthusiastic applause, the tension breaking instantly. The socialites rushed to compliment Frankie's poise, entirely erasing Evelyn from their collective memory. Later that evening, as they danced slowly beneath the magnificent crystal chandeliers, Nathaniel pulled Frankie intimately close. The scent of white orchids and expensive champagne hung in the air. "You handled that like an absolute queen," Nathaniel whispered, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "I have never been more in awe of you." Frankie smiled, resting her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. She moved her hand gently, placing his palm flat against her stomach. "Well, you should probably get used to it," she murmured, looking up into his eyes, a mischievous, joyous spark dancing in her gaze. "Because according to the royal physicians in Valerius, we are going to be raising an heir of our own in about 7 months. Nathaniel stopped dancing. He stared at her, his eyes widening in absolute overwhelming shock before a massive, irrepressible smile broke across his face. He picked her up, spinning her around the dance floor, laughing with a pure, unadulterated joy that echoed through the magnificent ballroom. The legacy of cruelty had been entirely dismantled, burned to the ground, and scattered to the wind. In its place, built on a foundation of unyielding strength, deep respect, and unbreakable love, a new, beautiful empire was just beginning to bloom. Can you believe the absolute audacity of this evil mother-in-law? Evelyn thought she had completely destroyed Frankie's spirit by shredding her beloved mother's vintage gown, but she has no idea the storm she just unleashed. What happens when actual European royalty steps in to protect their own against a toxic, snobby billionaire? The drama is just getting started, and you won't want to miss how Frankie gets her ultimate revenge. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to hit that like button, share this with your friends, and subscribe for the epic continuation. Drop a comment below. What would you do if someone ruined your wedding dress? See you in the next part.